Hello, this is Emma Kerber doing my Module 5 video for Communications 320. First section on understanding your audience. First question I picked was question 5, which is active listening is highlighted in the chapter as crucial for effective communication. Reference a specific aspect of active listening from the text and describe a time when active listening led to a better understanding in a professional conversation. So the aspects of active listening that were referenced in the text are maintaining eye contact, not interrupting, focusing on the message instead of our internal monologue, restating the message and asking clarifying questions. For me, I would say the one that I find the most challenging is not interrupting. I grew up in a really big family, and so to get a word in edgewise, you kind of had to interrupt somebody to be able to speak, and it wasn't really something that was ever considered rude. It was just kind of necessary. Definitely is not the case in the more professional sphere that I work in now. People are definitely going to be a little bit miffed if you are interrupting constantly or are someone who's not perceived as a good listener or an active listener because you're interjecting instead of actively listening to what they're trying to say. And one of the, I guess this isn't a specific instance of modeling better behavior, but something that we do at my work that I find helps with not interrupting and being better about that is just the structure of how our morning meetings work. They have a very deliberate flow of conversation, and it's called it's like 4 or 5, I can't remember, the 5 R's. So we start with recognition, so we recognize other people, and then recap, which is where we would recap anything that happened the previous day that we need to go over, and then review for appointments, and then they call it a role play, where it's kind of hashing out potential scenarios that we might need to address or fix, and then revise of just fixing anything that might need fixing for the day. Having that really intentional conversational path, I have found, makes it easier to not jump in out of turn. And then the second question that I did for that section, the chapter outlines strategies for tailoring communication to different audience segments. Identify one strategy discussed in the text and explain how you could have used or could use this strategy to communicate more effectively. So the text, the exact quote says, knowing your audience involves understanding others and their perspectives to see if they understand your words or examples you use to communicate your experience, points, and conclusions. One of the strategies that they suggest is to become an active perceiver. And the exact thing they say is to recognize each individual person's unique frame of reference. A good example of putting that into practice is, I've talked about this a little bit in some of my other videos, but some of the financial literacy classes that I get to go teach for my job. So tomorrow I'm going out to one of the high schools and I will be teaching a class for their accessible education program. So most of the people that I'll be talking to are intellectually disabled young adults. So for that message to be effective for them and to communicate effectively, I would need to consider the world through their framework, not just my own. For a lot of these students, they utilize, support services, or they have people in their life who manage their finances and might always be managing their finances. So going on, a long lesson about really niche financial topics or something really complicated might not be useful for them, whereas going over financial safety education would be better for them. And if I didn't consider their unique perspective and just thought like, oh, I'm just going to a high school, so I'll talk about the stuff that I talk to all high schoolers about, then my lesson could potentially fall on deaf ears or, come across as insensitive to their specific needs. And then the next section is international and intercultural business communication. The first question I picked for that was question 5. The chapter discusses challenges in managing communication across different time zones and cultural norms. Identify a key challenge mentioned and explain how it aligns with an experience you've had. So I had a good one about that. One of the cultural differences that the text talks a lot about is the difference between polychronic and monochronic perceptions of time. In the United States, we tend to be monochronic, where we experience time very linearly, where one thing is after each other. We do things at a set specific time, and being late to the set exact specific time is considered very rude, whereas polychronic is less linearly focused, and activities might run together or, start and end at times that aren't exactly specified. So at my work, we are very, very appointment dependent. Like, if you're more than 5 minutes late, you might lose your spot, because we're in a very high traffic area for what we do, and we get a lot of walk-ins. So one of the things that we run into is Spokane actually has one of the highest populations of Marshallese people in the country, which is an island nation, and their citizens can live and work in the United States under a protected status, which is actually kind of cool. It's there's a compact of free association, because the book talks a little bit about different treaties and stuff that might impact the political sphere of communication, but there's a compact of free association that we signed in the 80s as restitution for nuclear testing that we did during the Cold War, and in part in exchange for having a military presence in the Marshall Islands, which I read an article recently that Marshallese has actually surpassed Russian and Spanish as the most spoken language in Spokane public schools, other than English. But anyway, we run into cultural misunderstandings a lot with this population that we serve, because they are a very largely polychronic culture. It's really similar to Hawaii, where people run on island time, is kind of how it's been described to me, where a lot of timelines aren't strict deadlines. We have clients who get really upset when they can't accomplish what they need to because of this miscommunication. And we have had frustrations around missed appointments, or, what a more monochronic culture might feel is a disrespect of our time, because they've, scheduled an appointment and not been on time or not shown up for it. And we experience these different perceptions of time and what time should look like, and it just impacts our communication. And then the second question that I picked from this section: reflect on a concept from the chapter. This was question 6, related to cultural awareness that you found insightful. Explain how this concept could have improved a past communication experience in your life where cultural awareness was lacking. So one of the cultural awarenesses that the chapter discusses is that of direct versus indirect cultures. And it also discusses high power distance versus low power distance. So a lot of, not all of them obviously, but many Asian cultures are high power distance and indirect. So they're often hesitant. People from these cultures might be hesitant to raise issues or concerns with someone that they view as an authority figure. And one of the groups that I work with a lot at my specific location of my job are international students from Gonzaga, who, a lot of whom are Chinese, which, sidebar, they are the most organized people I've ever met in my entire life. Like, any document I could possibly ask these kids for, they have it like laminated, printed out in a folder, and just can hand it to me. They're awesome. But my point is, with that, a lot of these students, because of the culture that they come from, are extremely averse to asking, like, clarifying questions of me if they don't understand what I'm saying, or if I'm, or pushing back on me if I'm misunderstanding their need or desire or intention, because, you know, I'm not necessarily an authority figure in their life, but because I'm behind a desk and I'm the person helping them, they kind of see me as the authority figure in the room, and they don't want to correct me. So I've had to learn to check in with these students and very explicitly solicit feedback to make sure that I'm doing everything that they need and want me to do, and that they don't have any questions that they're kind of harboring and not bringing up, which most of these students helpfully do speak English pretty well, but I do appreciate the translators that I get, because they also do a pretty good job of cluing me in if they feel like I'm missing something, or that the other person is trying to say something in an indirect way that I'm not picking up on, and I very much appreciate that. So that is one good example of a cultural difference that I've had to adapt to in my professional life. Thank you.